Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dean Appleby, for the very warm welcome, and thank you to the university, the Keynote School, and the Initiative for Global Development team for inviting me here and giving me the opportunity to share a few words with you. It's my first time on the Notre Dame campus, but I have to say I feel very at home here in just the first few hours I've been here. I was born and raised in the Midwest in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I'm the son of two Catholic school educators. Growing up in a Catholic community and a Jesuit high school that had a strong focus on Catholic social teaching and social justice issues was a big part of my inspiration to pursue a career in global development. And so for me, being here at Notre Dame as one of the leading Catholic higher education institutions in the country, launching the Keynote School, dedicating its intellectual expertise to global issues and social justice feels right, and I commend the university for it, and I'm glad to be part of this. Or to put it more simply, I'm glad to have the Fighting Irish on our side of fighting global poverty. Let me echo the congratulations to the Mandela Fellows here tonight as part of the Young African Leaders Initiative that President Obama has launched. I have tremendous optimism in the future of the African continent, and that's largely fueled by the energy and ingenuity I've seen from young African leaders like yourselves who are doing so much to solve problems and spur entrepreneurial solutions in your own communities. So on behalf of USAID and the U.S. government, we are honored and humbled to be partnering with you on a fellowship that honors one of Africa's and the world's great leaders. And finally, I want to recognize and thank a number of the corporate and NGO partners here today, many of which are long-standing partners with USAID. We're partnering with both Accenture and Coca-Cola on a number of things, including extending access to medicines in Tanzania. We're partnering with IBM on harnessing the talent of their employees to support our programs on the ground. I know Catholic Relief Services is here from the NGO community as well. They've been a long-standing partner of USAID. Leading important programs on HIV, AIDS treatment and prevention, and a big partner of where I work in the Global Development Lab as a really leading NGO on integrating technology to advance development. So I'm glad to have all of these partners in the room today, and we're grateful for your partnership. This is truly a momentous time for global development. The number of people living in extreme poverty has been cut in half since 1990, a truly extraordinary feat. And for the first time in human history, ending extreme poverty is a goal that is within our reach. And this fall, the global community will come together to launch the Sustainable Development Goals as a follow-on to the Millennium Development Goals, which lay out an ambitious agenda to end extreme poverty for the 1.2 billion people who still live on less than $1.25 a day. And these development goals also address integral human development. Did I get it right, Dean? And the multi-dimensional nature of poverty by setting goals for issues ranging from ending hunger to empowering women to ensuring energy access for all. It's a bold agenda, so needless to say, achieving it will not be easy. And to echo the words of the Dean, it will require broad-based partnership between host country governments in developing countries and donor nations, civil society, higher educational institutions, faith-based organizations, and, to the theme of our forum, the private sector. And this was a premise that was front and center at the Financing for Development conference held earlier this month in Addis Ababa. Here, global stakeholders came together to address the question of how to finance achieving the ambitious SDGs. And the takeaway was clear. The SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, will not be achieved through foreign aid. Rather, the global community will need to come together to tap into resources and ingenuity from multiple sources, from host countries themselves, domestic resource mobilization by governments, greater flows of investment from both the local and the global private sector, and continued commitments from donor nations to channel aid to where it is most needed. And this new way of thinking about financing global development reflects a fundamentally changed development landscape. In 1970, 70% of the resource flows from the US to the developing world were foreign aid, official development foreign assistance. Today, it's less than 9%, 91% are private flows, remittances from diaspora, private investment, private philanthropy. And the numbers are even more striking when you look globally. Foreign aid from all donor nations is about $160 billion. Remittances, more than double that, $340 billion. Foreign investment nearing $1 trillion, and domestic investment by local businesses in their home economies is more than $3.7 trillion. So those resources dwarf foreign aid. So it really makes us rethink some of the conventional wisdom about the role of aid. And importantly, it needs to change how we think about the role of business and the private sector in driving development results. Now, USAID has worked with the private sector throughout our history since our founding by President Kennedy in 1961. The agency led pioneering work to strengthening the business-enabling environment in a number of countries that have since risen to become industrialized economies. And in the 1990s, USAID assistance was instrumental in supporting economies in Eastern Europe transition to market-based economies. And our work today at USAID builds on this legacy, but goes further. Today, we see partnering with the private sector not as an innovative program, but as a necessity, and as fundamentally a core way we go about solving development challenges. Partnering with the private sector is central to what our most recent USAID administrator, Raj Shah, described as our new model of development. And under his leadership, we launched a new mission statement, which begins, "We partner to end extreme poverty and promote resilient democratic societies while advancing our security and prosperity." And the choice of the two first words was very deliberate, "we partner." And that's because it demonstrates our view on the role of USAID and other donors, quite frankly, in the 21st century. Increasingly, our comparative advantage as a US government donor lies in acting as a convener and a catalyst of partnerships, an organization that can bring together stakeholders as diverse as host country governments, global corporations, local civil society, and US universities to figure out how we can solve problems better by working together. Yes, we remain an important funder of development programs, but we recognize that looking ahead, our most catalytic impact will be that which extends far beyond anything we fund directly to the sustainable partnerships we help spark that are owned by local stakeholders and future Yali Fellows, and the solutions we help to spur that are driven by entrepreneurs and by markets, not by aid. So that's the frame I'd like to bring in talking a bit about corporate impact in development, and just want to touch briefly on three core themes. First, to just reemphasize that engagement of the private sector is absolutely essential to global development and achieving the development goals. Second, that partnerships will be central to this, and finally, that we'll only succeed if we get better at the discipline of partnerships. So on the first message, I think I'm preaching to the choir and with many in the room here. Inclusive economic growth has been and will be the core driver of income generation and poverty reduction. The private sector is the primary driver of GDP growth in the developing world. It generates 80% of capital flows, 90% of employment. And developing countries will need to develop more than 600 million new jobs in the next 15 years to employ a rapidly growing workforce. And so unleashing the power of the private sector to create jobs will be essential. But the business community's role needs to go far beyond this. As Jane Nelson, a leader in this field from Harvard, stated, the private sector plays an important role not only in driving economic growth, but also in determining how resilient, inclusive, and environmentally sustainable that growth will be. Because we know that just because economic growth occurs, it does not necessarily follow that poor people will benefit. So business needs to play an active role in ensuring that growth reaches beyond urban centers in India and Brazil, all the way to poor rural communities in Central Africa and the Sahel, and that this growth does not come at the expense of the health of the planet. And we have seen that business can do this most powerfully, not through philanthropy, laudable as that is, but through leveraging a company's core business assets, its talent, its capabilities to deliver results. In the U.S. Global Development Lab, we also think the private sector has a role to play not only in achieving development goals, but accelerating our progress. We've seen how technological innovations driven by the private sector, the explosion of mobile technology and internet access, has made possible things never possible before, extending the reach of markets, enabling information to flow from rural communities. And business is key to driving these innovations. So we think working with business, we can not only get there, we can get there faster, more cost-effectively, more sustainably. So if we agree that the private sector is critical to achieving global development goals, how should the business community and the global development community work together most effectively? At USAID, we'd posit that partnerships are at the core of this shared endeavor. USAID has been at this for a while. We've built over more than 1,500 partnerships with 3,500 unique partners over the past decade. And building on this, we're continually expanding the ways that we try to partner with the private sector. And I'd like to highlight 5 modes of partnership, 5 models of partnership that we see as critical as we look ahead. The first is partnering to strengthen the business enabling environment for business in developing countries. USAID has long worked with host country governments on policy reforms to make it easier to start a business, to invest, and to ensure a level playing field for competition. And today we're continuing to do such work, but doing so differently in closer collaboration with businesses themselves to make sure we get those business enabling reforms right. An example of this is a new Global Alliance for Trade Facilitation, which was announced earlier this month. It's engaging the private sector in the implementation of the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement, which deals with streamlining border management, which is a barrier to trade and reduces trade incomes for developing countries. And the difference is rather than taking a technocratic approach to implementing these reforms, we're engaging with companies like UPS and Samsung and local businesses to say, which are the reforms which, if put in place, will drive commerce, and focusing on those. And so it's a shift from a technocratic view of reform to one that drives results for business, that creates jobs and raises incomes. A second model of partnership I'd highlight is co-investing in public-private partnerships between donors and corporations that deliver both development impact and shared value for companies. This is the model of partnership that USA has pursued through the Global Development Alliance, or GDA, under which we offer an open door to the private sector to partner wherever there's an intersection between a business interest and a development outcome that we care about. These partnerships are premised on principles of shared interest and shared value, and the most effective are those that tap into the talent and capabilities of our corporate partners. For example, in Nigeria, we've partnered with Olam, an agricultural trading and distribution company, to enable the company to source rice from local smallholders for the first time. It's a partnership that leveraged USAID's expertise in working with smallholders and increasing their productivity, and Olam's buying power to increase farmer income, increase productivity, and spur the development of an entire agricultural sector in Nigeria. And I'd highlight that universities and NGOs are almost always key partners in these collaborations. For example, in Vietnam, USAID's worked with Intel, Arizona State University, and Vietnamese higher education institutions to create the Higher Education and Engineering Alliance, an alliance that works with local universities to strengthen engineering education, which meets a talent need for Intel and contributes to sustainable development in Vietnam, an interest of USAID and, of course, the government. A third area for collaboration I'd point to centers on catalyzing investment flows into sectors that are critical for development. Across the developing world, sectors like agriculture and energy offer enormous opportunities for private investment, but face barriers due to inefficient capital markets or other market failures. And donors, financial institutions, and companies can partner to address such barriers and attract private capital in. At USAID, we have a number of tools we can do this. 8 in 10 small businesses in developing countries say they can't access the credit they need to grow. And under our Development and Credit Authority, we can provide partial credit guarantees to local banks, which enables lending to local small businesses that otherwise wouldn't occur because they're sharing the risk with the United States Treasury. Another example is President Obama's Power Africa initiative, which he spoke to on his recent trip to Kenya and Ethiopia. Power Africa mobilizes the capabilities of 12 U.S. government agencies, including USAID, to increase access to electricity on the African continent, where 600 million people lack access to basic power. And the focus here is on working with the private sector to catalyze investment transactions using the tools we have in our toolbox. So just this week in Ethiopia, President Obama signed a construction agreement for Africa's largest private geothermal energy project, a deal that was accelerated through Power Africa support. So aid doesn't have to be about grants. It can be about driving investment for important results. A fourth area I'd point to for donors in the private sector to partner is around spurring entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship in the developing world. This was a point highlighted again by President Obama when he addressed the Global Entrepreneurship Summit in Nairobi this past weekend. Many of you in the room have seen the explosion of new entrepreneurs scaling market-based solutions to serve people at the base of the economic pyramid. Entrepreneurs like Sanergy, which provides urban sanitation through a franchise model, or Vision Spring that distributes low-cost eyeglasses while providing employment to women. And at the same time, we've seen the growth of the impact investing industry and investors who are seeking to deploy capital not only to generate financial returns, but to achieve social returns. And again, donors, investors, private sector can work together to catalyze this entrepreneurship and impact investing space the same way over the past decades they've done so to create the microfinance industry. USAID's working in this space in a number of ways. We directly invest in hundreds of startup enterprises through programs like Development Innovation Ventures, which provide the early stage patient capital and grants that innovators need before they're ready to attract private investment and help them get there. At the same time, my office is working with private investors to share risks with them in different models to allow them to invest in earlier stage, riskier enterprises than they otherwise would. So again, a role of government in trying to build bridge gaps and make markets work. A final model for partnering between the donor community and the private sector is engaging the voice in business in important policy dialogues that impact both development and business. Business can be a powerful voice in driving policy change that is also good for development. And we've seen the growth in a number of multi-stakeholder alliances that bring together government, civil society, and the private sector to address policy issues and take collective action approaches to problem solving. USAID is supporting a number of these multi-stakeholder alliances in areas ranging from agricultural policy to deforestation to increasing financial inclusion around the developing world. So if we have all these models of partnership, all this potential to work together, where do we go next and what challenges do we need to overcome? I'd point to a few. One area that we need to work on further is how do we engage the private sector in the context of fragile and conflict-affected states. Over the next 15 years, the number of extreme poor living in fragile states, South Sudan, Yemen, these sorts of places, will rise from about 40% to 70%, while the number living in middle-income countries is shrinking rapidly. And today we see robust private sector activity and partnerships in economies like India and Colombia and Kenya. But it's much more difficult to deploy these models in countries that are plagued by instability, that lack infrastructure, and that have significant governance issues. So an important priority in the decade ahead will identifying partnership models that work in this fragile state context. Second, we need to continue to strengthen models for mobilizing collective action to address big problems that no single company or donor can tackle alone. As a community, we've gotten a lot better at partnerships that address a specific gap in a specific value chain in a specific country. But how do we take these partnerships to greater scale? We have examples of coalitions that have come together to tackle issues at an industry-wide or country-wide or even global level. The World Cocoa Foundation is a good example that brings together cocoa companies and NGOs to increase cocoa farmer income and ensure a sustainable supply of inputs for those companies. But the examples of multi-stakeholder alliances that have achieved impact at scale are still relatively few. And so we need to learn from the experiences of the pioneers in this space and all work together to take the scale of partnerships to the next level. Third, we need to continue to innovate on different ways we can blend different forms of capital, from donor grants to impact investing to commercial capital from banks and pension funds. Right now, in too many markets, there's a wide chasm between things that are grant funded and market funded, and in reality, many solutions need financing that is blended and not binary, and a path from incubation to commercial viability. So as a global community, we need to continue to innovate on financial mechanisms for meeting these needs. And finally, as a community of development practitioners, we need to get better at measuring results. From the business side, we need to generate more robust evidence of how pursuing inclusive business models can deliver tangible business results, whether that's straight to the bottom line or by generating more long-term sources of business value, like retaining talent or ensuring community legitimacy. And on the donor side, speaking for USAID, we need to more critically evaluate our own partnerships to look at the development impact they've delivered. Because beyond individual anecdotal examples, we don't have enough robust evidence of the partnership's sustainability and effectiveness. So there's much work yet to be done, but we've come a long way. And despite the challenges, I remain fundamentally optimistic about our potential as a global community to make progress towards ending extreme poverty. At USAID, we're committed to working with the full diversity of partners who share that vision, from young African leaders to global corporations. We're grateful to our partners here in the room today and those around the world for their commitment to this vision. We believe that we're stronger working together and leveraging each other's strengths to achieve shared goals, and that in the years ahead, we can make history by ending extreme poverty. I thank you for the opportunity to be with you and look forward to the forum ahead. Questions and answers. Any questions I can respond to? Comments?
Yes, my name is Abdullah. I come from Kenya. Currently, I'm working on a project based on renewable solar energy, and I had information about power. So, what's the procedure if a young African leader wants to get contacts of power Africa so that they bring their idea together?
So the question was around an entrepreneurial venture and how can a young African leader get in touch with Power Africa. Is that right? Yeah. So the good news is there's many more ways for young entrepreneurs and innovators to engage with USAID than there were, say, 5 or 10 years ago, when most of our work was through larger NGOs and contractors who are still very valuable partners to us. But in the last 5 years, we've opened a number of windows to be able to work more directly and tap into the ingenuity of smaller entrepreneurs, innovators, startups, et cetera. One example is a program we have called Development Innovation Ventures. And it's a global open grant competition for any organization working in any sector on any development issue. So very unusual for us. And it says, we'll invest in something in a staged way, a small amount of money for something that's a proof of concept, a larger amount of money for something that's proven, based on 3 simple criteria: evidence of development impact, cost effectiveness relative to other options that are out there, and a pathway to scale. So it's really trying to say, we'll put our money where there's evidence that it gets the most bang for the buck. And through that, we've been able to support a wide range of innovators, from off-grid energy innovators to academic institutions that have proven out really cost-effective models through things like randomized control trials. So that's one avenue. There's other avenues like Grand Challenges for Development. In the Power Africa example, there's an initiative called the Beyond the Grid that's focused on off-grid energy that's provided grants to about 25 earlier stage innovators. So we are changing and being open to working not only with the big guys, but with youth and entrepreneurs and other innovators that are out there. So thanks for the question.
Thank you. I really enjoyed your talk, and I'm going to try not to make this an academic question, which is about 5 minutes of my own chatter, what do you think? But in my research, I specialize in post-conflict as well as conflict states, and I actually I look at groups that can manage sustainable businesses, even in conflict. So these are trader diasporas and business communities that have been active for even millennia, not the people themselves, but their ancestors. And one of the things that I see is a lot of focus on entrepreneurship and innovation and so on and so forth, but the bulk of the business activity and the financial activity is actually in getting daily statements, in getting daily necessities. What is the scope in this particular partnership for involving these regional and local business groups? Because many times they are vilified, they're essentially excluded, and we go for, oh, this is an innovator, let's go for this particular thing, when the business people, the business community has been providing services for all these years, and when they fail, maybe a couple of times they're vilified, but then they do provide very sustainable service. So is there any plan in this particular partnership to actually involve this, or has there been any thought in this particular direction?
Great. So what about the local businesses that aren't the innovative social enterprise but are doing day-to-day work that make local economies work? It's critical. We're the innovation shop within USAID, so we have that innovation lens, but the agency continues to do work to, A, strengthening the business environment for all companies, B, support micro-enterprise through continued investments in microfinance and things that allow small businesses that maybe aren't going to grow super rapidly but provide sustainable employment for low-income people, the ability to work better through having working capital and the ability to access more resources than maybe they could before. And in sectors like agricultural, continuing to do the important work of things like helping strengthen farmer cooperatives and other kinds of organizations, which aren't in themselves a radical new business model, but that you can apply innovation to work better. Farmer cooperatives that are empowered with mobile technology that give them access to crop information about diseases or weather information or where to sell crops can work better than farmer cooperatives could before. And so agree, you sometimes can get caught up in the hype and focus on social enterprises and those that are good at pitching to donors who are sometimes run by expats rather than the businesses that are really rooted in local communities. So I think you're right to caution that we don't just focus on the sexy social enterprises, but look at the local economies and make sure we're strengthening them from the grassroots up. So thanks for the question.
I can follow it. Chris, thank you very much. I'm Andy Reynolds from the State Department. I work in communication and information policy.
Not my neighbor.
Yes. I want to put you on the spot slightly. First of all, you've been very articulate about the change in development finance from 1970 to present day, and the complete flip of ODA, direct assistance versus private sector, private capital flows. Eloquently put in Addis as well. Could you speak a little bit more about blended finance and where you see perhaps the best opportunities for latent capital that doesn't realize that development can be a good business proposition, first one. And the second, how can we help mentor further these splendid 25 fellows who have been here, who have impressed me, the ones I've met today, as very entrepreneurial, a cohort that's very strong, they're committed to work together, which is probably the most important lesson we learned. We came here to meet each other. So how can State Department and AIG be sure that these folks have some additional support as they go back to their nations and become the entrepreneurs we're looking to become?
Thank you. Great question, both. So empowering entrepreneurs and blended finance. Starting with the latter, certainly we can learn as much, if not more, from the entrepreneurs as we can offer them. But I think the role of donors can be to make sure entrepreneurs have access to the resources they need to bring their ideas and innovations to fruition. And increasing way we're thinking about this is, how do you strengthen entrepreneurial ecosystems in developing countries? Why does Silicon Valley work so well for bringing innovations to fruition? Well, it has world-class universities, it has a concentration of entrepreneurs who can learn from each other, it has efficient networks, and it has a infrastructure in place that enables all of this to happen. Venture capitalists that are willing to take risks, incubators that are willing to provide early stage entrepreneurs with business services so they don't have to do it all themselves. Entrepreneurs in most developing countries don't have any of that infrastructure. And the support we are providing is often very piecemeal. We'll provide some investment here and some access to finance there. And so something we're looking at is, how can we bring a bunch of actors together in a country where entrepreneurship is really taking off, at Kenya, Uganda, and India, Bangladesh, and say, how do we strengthen the overall ecosystem so that an entrepreneur not only has access to these things, but knows where to go, and is not just jumping from one grant competition to another prize to another award, and bring some information sharing around how the ecosystem works. And so you have access to finance that you need at a different stage of maturity, from a grant to a blended model to an impact investment to a loan from a local bank. And you have access to the business services you need from a local mentor or from a tax consultant or what have you, and have that support, because these are incredible entrepreneurs, and if they're empowered the same way a similar entrepreneur is in this country or others, where you have all that infrastructure around you, I think the sky's the limit in terms of what can be achieved. Blended finance, I think it's part of the same solution, and so mentioning that there's what's called this pioneer gap between early stage innovators and access to capital, that there's grant capital available early on to fund new ideas and get it to a certain point. And then this chasm where business people and innovators need to iterate their business model and try out things and fail a couple of times before they figure out what works. And it's in that gap where private capital is often not ready to go. It's too risky. And in the United States, again, in other countries, we have angel investors and friends and family that are putting up that risk capital. Well, can donors play a role to be that risk capital? Some angel investors, often in partnership with angel investors or friends and family, but can donor money be part of that equation that is taking some of the risk, bridging the gap, so that then commercial investment can work after that?